Okay everyone, if you read the thumbnail and title of this video, perhaps you've had a variety of thoughts. In this video, we're going to discuss a couple quotes from House of the Dragon showrunners when asked about Season 8 of Game of Thrones in a recent interview with Empire magazine. Now I'm sure for many of you, you feel that it's difficult to see any positives that House of the Dragon can pull from Game of Thrones' final season. And I mostly agree with that, but I think context is important, and if we kind of read between the lines here a bit, hopefully you'll see what I mean. I'll go over a few quotes from the interview with Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik. We'll look at them at face value and then see if we can at least dive a bit deeper, or at the very least offer some context. Now, if you enjoy this video or find it informative, please leave it a like. We're going to be leaning pretty heavily into House of the Dragon over the next few months, so make sure you're subscribed and have the notification bell on so that you don't miss out on any of that content coming up in the future. I really enjoy interacting with the community, and I'm very excited to experience House of the Dragon with all of you guys. Now back to the topic at hand. The specific area of the Empire piece of House of the Dragon that we're going to focus on was titled, How Game of Thrones' Controversial Episode, The Bells, Plays into House of the Dragon. Let's jump into the article here so everyone is up to speed, and there's really only one piece of this that contributes to the idea behind this video, so let's look at that real quick. For House of the Dragon co-showrunner Miguel Sapochnik, who directed The Bells, among many other acclaimed Thrones episodes, the divided reaction and backlash around Daenerys' devastation of the kingdom hasn't factored into how they've approached this show. There'll be no playing it safe, and no easy endings. Life doesn't end the way you want it to, he tells Empire. I think we very much wanted to pay attention to not that. Condal agrees. It doesn't really factor in at all. I think the minute you as a creator start playing defense, you're just taking the ground from beneath your feet. Should we be so lucky to have such a large and passionate fan base that will debate our show, I think that in itself is a sign of success. One thing's for sure, with this many hot-headed Targaryens on the board, House of the Dragon is going to bring much more in the way of both greatness and madness. I think for a lot of people, they may not like to hear the showrunner's response here. Probably a lot of people heard what they said here and felt that they were defending the conclusion of Game of Thrones or are oblivious to many of the problems. Well, I do not think that's what they are communicating here at all, and I'll tell you why. First of all, it's just not a good way to maintain favor by tearing down other productions. For us watching at home who are unhappy with D&D's decisions and execution can much more easily criticize and vocalize our thoughts from the perspective of an audience. While the goal is to entertain your audience, it's rare that you're going to get somebody in the film or television industry to make blanket statements that criticize any project, and that's why it gets so much attention when someone in the industry does speak their minds on other productions. A part of it is you never know when you may have to work with one of these people. Another part of it is that those that are in the industry understand that this is a very complicated business and more projects have been financed, filmed, and then canceled than the general public really knows. Just to blatantly express my point, there's so many moving parts and getting something actually made can be a miracle in itself. There's so much more than a writer, director, and your actors. These production crews work a ton of hours, and so much of the real groundwork that goes into these things is completed by people you'll never hear of. And Miguel Sapochnik in particular was a part of some of the most labor-intensive sets in the series. So he knows firsthand how much went into these episodes, and the last thing he's going to do is openly criticize his peers. Now, he may not ever come out and criticize D&D just because it's not professional, but you'll never hear him criticize Game of Thrones just out of respect for all of the efforts from hundreds of crew members working on that project. So there's that. But creatively, should we take issue with what Ryan Condal said? At just face value, maybe, but again, I think we need to consider his compassion toward everyone working on Game of Thrones as well. I think it's important that he stated they will not go on the defense to avoid what most people believe was poorly executed ideas, narratively. As he said, taking the ground from beneath their feet. For one, they don't actually have as much creative freedom on the major historical events. I think they will absolutely take some risks in how certain events unfold, but they're not going to start retconning the fundamental history of the Targaryens and rewrite the Dance of the Dragons. You see, Game of Thrones needed to visualize and at times condense a very detailed story when adapting A Song of Ice and Fire, but offer the key moments and other major events. So when those details went away, you still saw visually stunning events, many of which were directed by Miguel Sapochnik, but the depth and detail to characters was greatly reduced, which sent Game of Thrones into a tough place narratively much earlier on than Season 8. House of the Dragon will not be like this at all. The Dance of the Dragons, depending on how much time is dedicated to flashbacks, I think we'll get into the end of Jaehaerys a bit, and probably get into Aegon III a bit. But I think there is actually a very specific target ending point for this series, but I'll save that for a much more spoiler-filled video. My point is, we're looking at about 300 pages of source material to be adapted for the dance. The major events don't need to be created, they need context. They need significant detail. Condal and Sapochnik don't need to worry about earning a Mad Queen moment like D&D failed to do. They wouldn't be able to have a series about this story without stretching it out and explaining how we got to these events. They're not worried about having the same problems that Game of Thrones had, which is mostly attributed to pacing. Pacing hurt almost everything, especially character development and immersion. Consider this, and I'll be diving more into this in a collaborative video with a couple other creators very soon, but consider the dance takes roughly 300 pages in Fire and Blood. In screenplay format, a good rule of thumb is that each page is equivalent to 1 minute of screen time. 60 minutes per episode, with 10 episodes per season, that's 600 pages. Almost by default, pacing should never be an issue in this series. I've said it before, if this show fails or has a rough ending, it will be for totally different reasons than Game of Thrones. Ryan Condal said it himself, it's not even a factor. Season 8 criticism isn't something they need to pay attention to at all. To conclude the whole point of this video, if they were concerning themselves with Game of Thrones Season 8 criticism, then we should be prepared for a terrible series, because they'd have to really try hard to find themselves in the position D&D put themselves in with Game of Thrones. I made this video because it seemed like folks were getting a pretty strange impression from this interview they did with Empire Magazine. These guys are self-aware. They weren't hiding under a rock. Miguel actually directed the bells. And keep in mind, directing a TV episode doesn't mean you have creative control. Directors are king in movies. Writers are king of TV. So don't forget that. And also remember, Miguel did bring us some of the better visual experience of Game of Thrones, minus a lighting issue with The Long Night. Now look, that's going to be all for this video. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, please subscribe, and I'll be talking to you guys soon.